So,
I get this right.
so the order is Jack and Jerry, Hausman, and I'm going to ask that you hold questions and comments. Because we got to get the auditor by 2:45.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
All right, sounds good. That's you, isn't it?
Hi everybody. Hi everybody. Welcome. If I could have your attention, please. Thank you all for coming. It's so great to see so many people here on such a beautiful afternoon. We're going to get going with our program. We have a great, robust program for you today. It'll last probably 50 minutes to an hour or so. At the end, we're going to have a brief cake cutting ceremony at the end. And our guest of honor, who I will introduce at that time, will cut the first piece of cake. And I would just ask that you hold all of your questions and comments until the cake cutting ceremony and we're distributing cake. Let them eat cake, yes. So we just want to be able to get through all the presentations. We'll answer as many questions as we can. There is another group right after us in here, so we do need to leave by about 2:45 or so, pack up and leave. So that's sort of our logistics here. A bit tight, but hopefully we'll make it all work. So with that, I invite Jack and Jerry to talk about their inspiration and why they wanted to form All Aboard Minnesota.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Way back in college, I took a public speaking course, and one of the takeaways from that was the 3 B's of public speaking. Be brief, be sincere, and be seated. Okay? So they gave me 2 minutes to talk about how we launched this whole operation, so obviously it's going to be tough to do that in 2 minutes. So just let me say, I met Jerry in 2010. I grew up in Detroit. I've been a rail fan all my life. I took out my first subscription to Trains magazine in 1963. I was 10 at the time. Spent a lot of time traveling on trains in Michigan. By the time I got to Minnesota, I'd been here for 30 years or so, and was a member of Minnesota Association of Railroad Passengers, the Michigan Association of Railroad Passengers, Rick Harnish's Midwest High-Speed Rail Association, and so had Jerry been all this time. And when we first got together in 2010, we looked around, we said there's something missing in Minnesota. There's a big void here. We're not seeing the kind of grassroots advocacy that we were seeing in other states. Other states were making great headway, with Harnish's group especially. So I reached out to him and also to John DeLora, who was one of the founders of Michigan Association of Railroad Passengers. They put us in touch with Brian El Presidente Nelson and Bob Mullen, wherever he is. Bob, thank you. They in turn recruited Mark Quam over from Wisconsin, who had a lot of nonprofit experience, which was invaluable to us, and John Goodman, who had been managing the Amtrak's Midway Terminal, a veritable walking encyclopedia of rail tracks. So that was the initial core group. We got it going. We did all the heavy lifting. That's about all I have to say in 2 minutes. I would direct your attention to the whiteboard. We, Jerry and I and Brian, just sat down with a group called Streets Minnesota and recorded a very extensive podcast of all the nitty-gritty that went into getting this thing launched and off the ground, all the heavy lifting, the application to the 501c3, to the IRS, business plans, books, all that kind of good stuff. We had challenge after challenge because at that point the zip rail was being talked about down to Rochester, and the state still hadn't put together a state rail plan. We got together with MnDOT to give them our input on that. And that's all I have to say because my time is up, and I want to thank you all for coming here. I want to thank you for being involved. I would ask you to get involved somehow because the place does all volunteer, and we do need help in a lot of different ways to keep this thing going. And other than that, I just couldn't be happier or more proud to be here speaking to you today. So thank you very much.
You're not gonna leave me, Jack, are you?
Well, I'll be right here, Jerry.
Okay. Ian, you wanna weigh in? He was the one who did our podcast. If you have any questions about it,
It's more interesting than Jack made it sound.
It really is quite entertaining. I think you'd like it.
and I'll be real honest with you, I was a nervous wreck. I thought, oh my goodness, what's that? And he put us at ease. It was very good. Unlike Jack, I have to put everything in writing or I'll talk too much for those people who know me. And so I put everything in print. So I'll try to just stick to my script, so I don't talk too much. I thought I'd just quick give you about 5 things that kind of shape who I am, and you'll see why I got frustrated. I was in the same organizations that Jack talked about. By the time I was 21, I'd ridden many trains. In fact, I'd taken the duty train, a sleeper train to East Berlin. When I was 21, I rented 3 sleeper cars on the end of the TEE from Frankfurt to Roma, or we would say Frankfurt to Rome, and took with me 100 military personnel. I was in the Army, as you probably put 2 and 2 together. And when I came back to the USA, I was rather naive and I wanted to ban cars. That's how much I liked trains. And my boss was Herr Tismer, who was German. He said, I think you might be a little bit over-optimistic. And I said, okay. But I still never gave up, okay? And then I was, like he said, I was in MnDOT and all those other organizations. I was involved earlier in 2 nonprofits, so I knew this wouldn't be easy. And my background was a teacher, so you'll see the education piece a lot in everything we do today. So now I'll move to my frustrations that Jack already talked about. I was with MnDOT for years, great ideas, but nothing ever changed. Nothing changed. And I thought, ugh. And I knew how comfortable train riding was in Europe. I remembered that in Germany, the United States put in, it was actually GE put in the signaling, is my understanding, after World War II, etc. And basically I got frustrated because I'm more of a doer. I'm not a person who likes to sit down and complain. I prefer to pick up the shovel and do something, kind of thing. And then I'm gonna jump to 2010 when I met the famous guy in the back, Jack, because this really is his idea. I helped Rick Carnage set up a table at train day at the old Midway station, and Jack was one of the people that helped me. I had shifts every 3 hours, and he came in and we hit it off. Well, about a year later, the phone rings, and Jack has this idea. I'm thinking, oh yeah, okay, you know. But we sat down at Buca's. I don't know how much pasta we ate, but we were there at Buca's a lot. And we hashed it out. We decided that we really needed an advocacy group, somebody that pushed for change, and one that would actually improve passenger rail service in and out of Minnesota. That was our key thing. So then the next thing I want to talk about, my last thing, is the core group that developed. We developed a core group, and he's already alluded to some of the key people. And I had a little different take. Instead of reaching out to those people, because that's what Jack was doing, I was going to Wisconsin, because they had a lot of talent in Wisconsin. And everything from WizArp all over Wisconsin, ProRail, the group in Eau Claire, help me, where's Mark? What's the group? Mark.
He's outside.
You went outside, okay. At any rate, the group that's working from Eau Claire to St. Paul. At any rate, I reached out to those groups. I made several trips to Wisconsin, of course, on the train. And lots of people kept telling me, not only there, but in the bank, they kept saying, what a great idea, we need more trains, what a great idea. So, of course, that makes me feel better and I wanna work harder. So we did settle on some positive core principles. We ended up with a core group who had really, I think this is the key sentence for me, we ended up with a core group with a diverse blend of skills who were willing to work to see this group form. I don't know, I almost wanna say that 5 times, because that's my key thing. This group became the board after a lot of hours hammering out the details. Oh my goodness, I could say a lot about that. But anyway, finally, I just want to say it again, this connection with so many people really helped us get our outreach started in several cities, not just the Twin Cities, getting us not only support and collaboration, but also friends. I mean, I look out here, I see a lot of people that, oh yeah, I remember you. Yeah, but when I'm out in the street, when I walked into the library, I ran into somebody. It's like, holy buckets. It helped our educational efforts as few Minnesotans, and this is another key piece of the educational part, few people in Minnesota have ever ridden a train, okay? And then those friendships kept me going for more and more better trains. Now even when I go in and out of my bank to get my passport, the guy waves at me, my banker, and he goes, "Oh, hi, train guy." I don't even know if he knows my name. But thanks for listening, and never give up.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for coming.
Whoops. So, thank you, Jack and Jerry, for their idea to form All Aboard Minnesota. And so now I'm gonna talk about what we've accomplished in the past 10 years with you as part of the citizen advocacy movement to expand intercity passenger rail within the state of Minnesota and beyond. And then I'll talk a little bit about where we're going. So in those early years, we spent a lot of time really trying to define who we were gonna be. What is our mission? What is our vision? What were we gonna do? How are we gonna move the needle? And so what we came up with is what you see here, expanding intercity passenger rail in the upper Midwest. And we were gonna focus on long-distance passenger service within the state of Minnesota and the upper Midwest. We weren't gonna focus on commuter rail. We weren't gonna focus on light rail, because there are a lot of organizations in this state that do a great job with that already. And being a small nonprofit group with limited resources, especially then, we wanted to stay focused and we really wanted to make a difference. So we spent, that may seem very almost basic, but we spent a lot of time to figure that out. So we got incorporated in September 2013, and then we spent quite a bit of time on developing a good business plan, because we really wanted to have sort of a rock-solid roadmap that we could operate from and keep us on course, keep us focused so that we wouldn't wander and spin and, you know, like happens with other organizations. We didn't want to do that. We adopted a good set of bylaws for good governance so that we could operate efficiently. And then we spent a lot of time on our route focus. What routes were we going to focus on that would be most meaningful for the state of Minnesota, the citizens and the communities that they served? And I'll talk about that in just a second. And then we also spent quite a bit of time talking about and developing what our key messaging was gonna be. We really did a lot of research around things like, what do people wanna know? What do they wanna hear? What's gonna engage people? What's gonna be meaningful and what's gonna resonate? So we spent a lot of time doing a lot of research about what that might look like. So the four routes that we really have been focused on and are focused on today are adding a second Twin Cities Chicago train, Twin Cities to Des Moines and Kansas City service, which would connect us with the Southwest Chief to Los Angeles and the California Zephyr to San Francisco, Twin Cities Duluth service, of course, which is key for the state, and extending the second train to Chicago to Fargo-Moorhead. So those are the four key routes that we've been focused on and are focused on today. Our initial focus was Twin Cities to Chicago, to really advocate and educate for that, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second. So in those early years, after doing all of that work, which may sound kind of basic, but again, for an all-volunteer organization, that took a lot of time, believe me, as Jack and Jerry alluded to. We set up public meetings. We held them twice a year. We developed a newsletter series. We developed action alerts to alert people sort of on a real-time basis what might happen with passenger rail. And it was funny, I was researching some of our earlier campaigns, and when the Trump administration announced drastic cuts to Amtrak, essentially eliminating the long-distance network, we sent out a series of action alerts about that, and you guys responded. So we were very grateful for that. We also spent a lot of time trying to understand and learn about the Minnesota House and Senate Transportation Committees. Who were the key players? Who was involved? Who supported passenger rail? Who didn't and why? And we really tried to develop a lot of relationships and really get to know how that worked. We spent quite a bit of time with MnDOT, giving them input and help where we could with the state rail plan. And we started building out members and partners across the upper Midwest. So we really got going probably about 2016, 2017, and what we call public outreach. So in all these cities that you see here, we met with mayors, city councils, education and business leaders. We invited the general public to public forum meetings to talk about the impact of passenger rail and what it would mean for their cities, what it would mean for their lives, what the economic return would be, what the mobility would look like. And interestingly, one of our most successful public outreach forums was in Fargo-Moorhead, where that was in 2019. I think we had almost 200 people show up for that. So there was a tremendous amount of interest in Fargo-Moorhead, and there still is today. We still get emails, calls, what's going on? When is our train gonna run? It'll be a little while yet, but in 2018, we held the first Upper Midwest Rail Summit. We brought together about 10 different rail advocacy groups from across the Upper Midwest for a day-long session at the Minneapolis Library. It was attended by over 150 people. And so we really sort of blew out our plan to advocate and educate for more passenger rail. In 2019 and 2020, we held rallies at the state capitol, and our purpose there was to get people excited about legislation that was currently moving through the Minnesota House and Senate to give MnDOT more money to study some of the corridors that I just mentioned, to actually do the environmental impact assessment, the design studies, things like that. And jointly with that, we worked with 8 city councils on the Empire Builder line to pass resolutions, and we packaged that up for the state legislature to say, hey, these cities in your state want more passenger rail. And so that was a particularly effective vehicle. We held joint public meetings with All Aboard Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Association of Railroad Passengers. And most recently, we met with the Minnesota congressional delegation to talk about some of Amtrak's operational issues. During COVID, Amtrak was given money to keep basically the same service levels, but service levels were cut, the train cars were reduced, and we were very concerned about that. So we met with our Minnesota senators, we met with Representative Betty McCollum, who sits on the Appropriations Committee, to hold Amtrak management accountable to run the long distance network properly. Now, since that time, things have gotten a lot better. Service has been restored. Amtrak has spent about $28 million to refurbish about 100 long distance rail cars. So things are definitely better than they were. So we're very grateful for that. And about the same time, we invested in our future and invested in our reach. We developed a new website, better branding, professionally produced videos, and better social media presence. So what does this all mean? So citizen advocacy groups, there's probably hundreds of them around the nation that do what we do on a state level. So our model is not new. But citizen advocacy has done things like save the long distance Texas Eagle that runs from Chicago to San Antonio. It helped to launch the Downeaster corridor service from Boston to Portland, Maine. Is probably one of the most successful corridors in the nation right now. And of course us, helping to get the second Twin Cities Chicago train and Northern Lights Express launched. And the impact of all these things that have happened jointly with you is that we've reached thousands of people across the state and the upper Midwest. Legislators heard your voice with our action alerts and our newsletters. And how do we know that? They told us that. They said, yeah, you blew up our email box. You got the phones to ring. So we can tell you that the conversation within the state legislature has changed for the better. There's probably more Minnesota House representatives and Minnesota senators today that have come out publicly in support for our passenger rail than there ever has been before. And so we feel like the dynamic is changing, the conversation has changed for the better. So where do we go from here? We are gonna stay on our course for more public outreach. We're gonna focus on daytime passenger service from St. Paul to Fargo-Moorhead. There's a lot of political support along that line. We wanna keep that stoked. We wanna keep that going. We wanna focus on the Twin Cities, Kansas City route. We think that that could be a great addition to our passenger rail network for the upper Midwest and us. And we're gonna invest more in our messaging and reach. We really wanna try to reach new audiences. We wanna expand our reach with Ian's help. He's been a great supporter with podcasts for Streets Minnesota. So we're gonna invest in new videos, new social media platforms, things like that. Once the second train begins rolling, we are gonna do a communication PR plan to kick that off, make sure that it's successful. This will be the first new passenger train service that Minnesota has seen since 1985. So we are obviously very excited about that. But most importantly, we're gonna keep you informed. So, to conclude, you guys made all of this happen. Like I said, the dialogue has changed, the atmosphere is a lot better today. We couldn't have done it without your help, your generosity, your support, your commitment. We are truly grateful to you, for you, and truly grateful that you've shown up today. You wouldn't care about passenger rail if you weren't here. So thank you for everything. We look forward to another 10 successful years. Give yourselves a hand. All right, and with that, I would like to introduce Minnesota House Representative Erin Koegel to talk about the historic, very historic, transportation bill that was passed, which is gonna enable more passenger trains to roll in the state. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Alice. It's really fun to come in and, everybody's been doing this work for so long, and then I kind of met the right place at the right time and get all the credit. So. But we were able to do a lot of really good work this session, and it's really because of the work that Alice has done and all of you have done. Like I said, for me it was really easy because I just got to come in, and we had so many advocates within the legislature for the Northern Lights Express, and then also not only that, but really figuring out how we set up that Moorhead Fargo line and use that as a way to also help boost the service between St. Cloud and the Twin Cities on the North Star. They're all, and it's really cool because so the NLX, that will come down. It's actually twice this year. I really wish there was a rail line. One was the Sunday after the Trampled by Turtles concert because all I wanted to do was sleep, and then the other was we were able to go up to the Gophers UMD hockey game a couple weekends ago, and so. Brought the family up there and stayed at the hotel, and just thought how amazing would it be if I didn't have to worry about driving and parking and getting back and forth to the arena and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm very much excited. I'm a Duluth kid too, so I went to school at UMD, and I'm sure my parents would have loved it if there was a train too, because then after the first 6 months at school I was able to do what girls do and get their way with their dad and get my car at school. So, I probably would have very much appreciated it too, being able to get home from Duluth. And so, but what we did do is we were able to get $194 million in general fund money for the Northern Lights Expressway. And I pulled up the spreadsheet just so I could share it with everybody. So so we did the Milwaukee-Chicago Rail Corridor. That was in there at $5.3 million. We got Northern Lights Express with $194.7 million. We also created the intercity rail planning and project management, an ongoing fund of about $1 million every biennium for that office, and then also analysis of the St. Cloud Transit Service Railway, which is really that the North Star corridor all the way up to St. Cloud, and so that can really tie in well with that Fargo Moorhead train. And so please keep up the pressure, keep putting it on us, because I want to be able to go up to an NDSU hockey game too. But yeah, I'm really excited, and I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be in the right place at the right time and get a bunch of credit. So.
this to work, which it's not. Where's our chief technology officer?
Kurt, oh, Kurt's coming up. I have to tell one quick story.
This is
about
where you'll learn your
Moorhead.
public
Just listen
speaking
to Erin. We had one gal stand up in our outreach in Moorhead back on October 30th of 2019. And this was in the public section. And she stood up and she said to Frank and Brian, why can't we have this train, the second train from St. Paul to Fargo next week? And part of us laughed, part of us went, no, well, it's not that simple. But I mean, there's a tremendous amount of interest in Fargo Moorhead. Just had to share that. I thought I would fill in a gap.
So next up is Mr. Frank Loetterle from the Federal Railroad Administration. That's quite the title, Frank. I love that.
Yeah, that is pretty impressive, isn't it? I left the word acting off there because I'm only temporary, and with the emphasis on the word acting. But let me just take a minute here and explain a little bit about what's happening at the FRA. The Federal Railroad Administration was begun as a safety organization to oversee safety with respect to track, equipment, signaling, and all of these other things associated with the railroad industry. The FRA was not initially intended to be a planning organization. And it wasn't until 2009 that they actually had a planning staff working on things like NLX and some of the other projects that you've seen. And one of the criticisms of the FRA back in 2010, 2011, 2012 was that it seemed to take them a long time to figure out how to spend $13 billion, which is what was in the PRIA. Well, I don't know how much you're following the bipartisan infrastructure law, or it's also known as the IIJA, or the
Infrastructure Investment and Jobs.
thank you, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I actually just looked that up. If you haven't been following that, you need to take the time to really understand that, because as time goes on, the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to be mentioned in the same breath as the Staggers Act, as PRIA, all of these major laws, because this is a sea change in the world of passenger rail. $66 billion, and I know some of that goes to freight, I believe, but a little bit. I haven't delved into it that much, but the $66 billion, I mean, you just stop and think about that for a moment. It's more money than has been invested in Amtrak in 50 years. Mark, you're shaking your head, that's right.
Yes, sir.
50 years is a half a century, guys. A half a century of a lack of investment in passenger rail, and now we have the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has more money now available. So now there's a challenge there, is how do we spend that money? You know, a lot of people, I think, they see these laws passed and wondering, in a couple of weeks of wondering where's the check? Where's the money? It takes a little while to figure out how to spend it, and that's part of our job. So my office, the Office of Planning and Engineering, we're considered the technical experts, but there's a whole lot of other people involved in trying to get this happen, including the people that write grants, the people that oversee grants, and the FRA planning function. The FRA reorganized.
Looking for the shack.
Wanting money.
It said spam risk again. That's the only call I get, is spam risk. The FRA reorganized last fall, about a year ago, because the safety office was up here and the planning office was down here somewhere. The planning office has been elevated to be the same level of significance as the safety office. And we're growing, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think we're already 4 times the size that we had been. And this office is a brand new office. Right now we have about 12 people that work in the office that I'm deputy for. We're going to 60, we're on our way to 60. And that includes both the engineering function and the planning function. So I just wanted to take a moment and explain a little bit about what's going on with FRA, because there really is an effort to respond to this law in a way that they did not respond to it in 2009. It's still taking some time to get the money out there, but the two programs which I think are going to be most interesting to you, and I think Greg is going to talk a little bit more about it, but the Corridor ID program and the federal state partnership program, sometime between now and Christmas will be the first set of announcements on which projects are going to be funded through those two programs. That's about all I can say about that. So let's talk about.
Here, you can just use this clicker.
Oh, well, how about I do this? How about I do this? No, you can get to it.
Okay.
The Amtrak long distance service study was a requirement of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the law requires FRA to conduct a study to look at the restoration of Amtrak routes that had been discontinued since Amtrak was formed in 1971. Now, fortunately, the law was written broad enough so that there was a clause at the end that says, and FRA can look at other routes. So someone could read the way that the statute is written and assume that what we're going to do is we're going to list out all of those discontinued routes and either check yes or no. That's not what we did. What we're doing is we're looking at how do we create a true national network of passenger rail, which will include some of the restored routes, but our methodology is a little different. Here you can see the existing system, and I'm speaking to the choir a little bit here, right? Because we all know that it's a Chicago-based system, and it's a kind of hub and spoke other than the East Coast, and that there's a lot of these areas around the country that are just not served. So if you go to the next slide, what our methodology is a four-step process of first developing an enhanced network. I'll explain that in just a minute. And then on that network, figuring out how to organize new passenger routes, and then look at how are we going to, what is our implementation policies to make that happen. So today I'm just going to talk about the enhanced network, and when you go back to the legislation, we're required to look at these new routes from this perspective of metropolitan area travel flows, connecting major cities, but also connecting smaller cities within the country, and ensuring that we have good accessibility for rural areas. We also are required to have good geographic coverage, and it was specifically mentioned that we really ought to listen to our stakeholders. So if you go to the next slide, go one more. So here is what we call the enhanced network. What we're trying to accomplish here is, at this step, is to not define routes, but to define segments in a network that serve the places and the people and the markets that ought to be served. So as we went through this step, we weren't thinking about how we're going to serve these segments. We were just looking at, what are the cities, what are the locations that ought to have passenger rail services. One of the first ways that we did that is we actually took a look at some data that the Federal Highway Administration has on how many people are today moving between places, between metropolitan areas, and by car, by rail, by air. And we took that information and looked at, okay, where are some of these locations that are not served by rail? So the best example is Chicago to Atlanta. You can't get from Chicago to Atlanta efficiently on rail. So that's one of the corridors that we've been looking at. Minneapolis to Denver. There's a lot of examples of metropolitan travel flows that just don't fit within that existing network. And so that was our first step. Our next step was to take a look at things like Native American tribal lands. We have mapping of specific areas, specific rural areas that are of lower socioeconomic standing right now. We looked at all of these areas, and then we also looked at geographic equity. So one of the main points that I want to emphasize, and what I've been trying to message here, is that, and one of the, I used to do a lot of transit planning here in the Twin Cities, and one of the things that always irked me about the way it was done is that when we did the interstate highway system, both at a national and local level, we drew a network. And then we didn't build the entire network, we built pieces as we were able to, but it was always with this network in mind. But with light rail transit, the conversation was always around ridership. Who's going to ride? How many people are going to ride? We need to make, the emphasis was not on creating a transit network, which, by the way, would include more than LRT. It was on ridership, and I'm telling you that that's not how we did this. Ridership is represented in the methodology by looking at metropolitan travel flows, but there are areas, if that's all you look at, there are going to be significant areas of the country not served. So, for example, a lot of people are going to look at this line from Cheyenne to Billings. And by the way, we're going to pick one. In that particular instance, we're going to pare it down to one route. But it would be easy to say that who's going to ride that line. But it's not just about the people that live along that line. It's about the people, say, from Seattle to Denver, who might use that line, or St. Paul to an area in Wyoming. The point is this: when you look at this map, it's not all about ridership, because those are the words that we hear from our critics a lot. It's about building a network that works efficiently. Now, the step that we're in right now, which I can't share a lot with you, but we have developed a little more than a dozen new routes to fit this network that will, and our objective is to make sure that each one of these segments are served. So, for example, here we see that the existing Southern Crescent serves North and South Carolina on the east side of the Appalachians, but we also need to serve the west side of the Appalachians. So we've developed routes to pick up some of these areas that are not well served right now, and we're examining them right now from an individual route basis. But our next step in doing this is to see how does the network work, and we're making adjustments to recognize that some adjustments to an individual route may not be the best way to run that route, but it's the best way to run an entire network. So that's where we're at with the long distance study. We've had 2 rounds of stakeholder meetings so far. We 6 meetings each, held in 6 different places around the country. Our third round of stakeholder meetings is going to be held at the beginning of February, and at that time we will roll out the routes and we'll talk about the routes, and you'll be able to see that. I'm anticipating that one of the things that I keep telling our consulting team is to not think about the development of these routes in a strictly mathematical, scientific way, because there's a lot of individual judgment you need to bring to bear here. And I think that our more vocal, not critics, but critiques are going to be from people like you who really understand this stuff and wonder why we didn't put a route here or a route there. But part of our process is to make sure that we explain exactly why we're doing what we're doing, and that's part of what we're doing right now is make sure that we've got that story behind us. So first part of February, you'll see the next step. If you're interested in seeing more about the detail of what this is about, all the slides that we showed in the stakeholder meetings are on our website, you can go through the whole process. If you have a question, you can contact me, and I'll feel free to talk to you about it. Are there any questions about this?
Thought you were waiting to do that.
We're gonna wait till the
Oh,
cake
I'm
ceremony.
sorry.
No, that's fine.
Sorry.
No.
Okay. Well, that's my my presentation.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Greg Mathis from the Minnesota Department of Transportation to give us an update on where they're at in the state rail plan, second train to Chicago, and Northern Lights Express.
Let's let Robert talk first about the rail plan real quick, then I can jump into my
Okay,
stuff.
sounds great.
Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. So this kind of came to me a couple of days ago, so I'm not super rehearsed, so I have a series of prompts here. Anyway, I just want to start off by kind of going back to what Frank was just saying about establishing a vision for the passenger network of the future. At a national level, I think what Frank is talking about is what we'd like to see happen at a more local, state level. And I think it's interesting that we inherited 100 years of freight railroads and passenger railroads going back to like the 1850s, right? Driving the Golden Spike in Utah, and here we are trying to put money back into recreating a network that once was pretty solid and trying to figure out what that should look like for future. So anyways, I thought that was fascinating. My name is Robert Clarkson. I'm a transportation planner at MnDOT, and I'm here because I am managing an update of the state rail plan. We've done this twice before. We initially did one in 2010. We did an update to it in 2015, and we're doing it now a couple of years behind our schedule. And I'm working with Linda Sporer from Zan Associates, who's here in the back. She's our consultant for public engagement. Let's see. The state rail plan is one of the elements of the family of MnDOT's plans. So we have a pedestrian plan and a highway system plan and a variety of others. The freight plan. And those cover multiple different modes of transportation. I mentioned a few of them. It does not really address light rail or the North Star corridor, which is commuter rail and more local transit, and that's intentional. They will be mentioned, but they're not going to be extensively covered because the rail plan is about, I guess, what I tend to sometimes call heavy rail, to differentiate it. Public agencies like MnDOT have a unique role in the planning for railroads. Since we don't own the right of way, we can't exactly tell BNSF what to do. So we do work with them. Federal law requires states to complete rail plans, and ours is due in December this year. The content of the plan involves two major areas of emphasis. Documentation of the existing rail system, so that's our existing state network, both for freight and for passenger purposes. And then also an update of the vision for the rail system of the future. And for that second element, we'll identify both freight and passenger rail needs and opportunities, and then establish the criteria for how we're going to make investments with all of this influx of money. At least that part that's coming for passenger purposes out of IIJA. And we have some programs at MnDOT that support the freight side of the conversation as well. So we're now in the early stages of development of that plan. I have a handout here. There's a handful more of them outside, so hopefully we can get everyone who wants one. But we're in the early stages of developing that plan. On the back side, you'll see there's a development timeline for how quickly we expect to complete this. I said it's due in December. Normally these take 2 years. We've compressed that into about 15 months. We are working currently on some of the initial background research and doing some of this initial public engagement. And then we'll enter into a SWOT analysis here in the spring. We have a broad range of public and private sector stakeholders who will play a key role in the development of this plan. MnDOT's are committed to increasing transparency and collaboration to ensure the voices of everyone in the state are heard through this process. And to meet this commitment, we'll engage a broad array of internal to MnDOT state agencies and external stakeholders, audiences like this one. To ensure that you know about the plan and to let you know about the timeline for development, we invite you to have a voice in the planning process. On the sheet that I have, there's a place where you can sign up to receive updates and go and look at our website, which is in an early phase of development itself. Public engagement is beginning now, and it's crucial. We expect to have a public survey coming out soon, and the first round of public meetings will be scheduled in early 2024. And so, yeah, we're doing meetings like this, having meetings with key stakeholders, rail companies, shippers, advocacy groups, and the like. I mentioned the website, that's also on the back of the handout. Feel free to sign up. We'd love to talk with you. I don't want to take a ton more time, so I'm going to step aside. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, December of next year, if I didn't make that. Thank you. Not 2 months from now. So I'll leave these right here, I guess, for now.
Greg, welcome.
Thanks. Okay, we're down near the end of the movie, right? All the
Yep.
credits.
Yeah.
That was gonna be really good for us. So, thanks for letting me be here. My name's Greg Mathis. I'm State Planning Director for Passenger Rail MnDOT. And so I'm gonna kind of build on what Representative Koegel and Frankie talked about, what we're working on with all that money that we did receive. So, just want to do a quick snapshot of where we are today. We have one long distance train to Builder, which I think most of you are familiar with. We have four, we're now back up to 4 daily round trips, weekdays on North Star. I think that began in early October. And then we have our 2 tourist heritage roads that we don't want to forget about, that kind of get lost in it. So we have Ken here from North Shore Scenic, and then we also have the Osceola and St. Croix Valley, although it doesn't stop here. It's based out of St. Paul. So let's go ahead, next one. So to kind of provide some perspective on what Frank talked about, yes, $66 billion was appropriated for freight and passenger rail over a 5-year period. I think what Frank maybe didn't mention, it's important to just keep in mind that Congress still needs to appropriate the funding annually, so that full 66 isn't guaranteed. But that IIJA does establish 2 new key funding programs for passenger rail. First is Corridor ID, or Corridor Identification Development Program. The FRA likes to have really wordy terms for programs. We'll call it Corridor ID, but this is basically a new program that funds really project development work. So FRA has kind of a life cycle for projects. First step is to develop the rail plan that Robert's working on, and that will set the vision for kind of what are the priorities for us moving forward. Once we set those priorities for corridors, this program will help fund scoping, service development planning, preliminary engineering, and NEPA for actually getting those corridors into the queue and underway. And so FRA, I think, is being really strategic with this program. They're really intending it to be to create this prioritized pipeline of projects that are ready for capital funding. And reflective of that, FRA will start, I think, please verify that this has changed, but projects that complete this program are going to be prioritized for capital funding moving forward under other grant programs. Frank's nodding, so we assume that's still correct. So one of those key programs, I think a lot of people have heard about the Christie program, but there's a new one just for passenger rail, which is the Federal State Partnership for Interstate Passenger Rail, FSP for short, and that really funds those capital projects. So once you complete Corridor ID, you can get moving under the FSP program. And that, like many US DOT programs, has an 80-20 cost split, so the feds will pay up to 80% of the project cost, and states or the local sponsor needs to pay 20%. So can we go back for just a second?
Oh, sure.
So I just want to touch on one other thing here. So this FSP program is for both existing services. It'll help handle like state of good repair backlog across the nation, safety improvements related to passenger rail, but it also will allow for enhanced and new services that we'll be talking about. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about all that money that Representative Koegel was talking about earlier. First project we're working on is the Twin Cities Milwaukee-Chicago corridor, or TCMC for short. I know Brian touched on that a little bit. This is going to be a new state-supported train, and I'll kind of explain the differences between state-supported and what Frank's working on. Long-distance trains are those trains that travel over 750 miles, and so the federal government helps subsidize those operating costs to Amtrak. Under federal legislation, anything that's less than 750 miles, the states are responsible for sponsoring that service, so the states are on the hook for paying that cost. So this is about 411 mile corridor, so we're working with Wisconsin and Illinois to start this service. Operating the same routes, the Empire Builder, serve all the same stops, plus it will also stop at the Milwaukee Airport Station and in Sturtevant, so we'll have 2 additional stops along here. And so I think, especially, rural areas, this is really about connecting rural areas with urban areas. So, this will give 2 options for even flying, through, if you're wanting to get the Twin Cities to fly out or Milwaukee. Capital improvements are currently in final design. We've previously gotten funding for that. It's going to be jointly funded by FRA. We've got Chrissy Grant, WisDOT's contributing money, MnDOT's contributing money, Amtrak's putting in some money. And we're currently in final design. Once we get that in a good place, we'll move forward with construction. One thing that's really, really unique about this service is normally you complete construction before you actually start the service. As you many of you are probably aware, Canadian Pacific wanted to merge with Kansas City Southern, and Amtrak worked out a deal with CP as a condition of supporting that to allow this service to get started before we actually complete capital construction. So we're actually working on trying to get that started now. So we're really working through all the details that go into that. So that's everything from what's the schedule to what's the ticket pricing to what kind of food and beverage are we going to have on the train, pets, bikes, all those details. So a lot to figure out, and we appreciate our partners really working with us on all this. So as we get that buttoned up, there's also a lot of agreements that need to be done. Amtrak needs agreements with the host railroads. All the states need agreements to Amtrak to operate the service. The states need state-to-state cost sharing agreements. And then we're also getting a federal grant to help subsidize the first years of operation. So we also need, as Frank is talking about, there's grant writers, so we're also working with the grant writers at FRA to get those grants awarded so we can actually take advantage of that, because the first year will pay for up to 90% of the funding gap on it. So we need that before we get the service started. So I know a lot of people want to know when we're going to get started, but so once we get all those details buttoned up, we'll be happy to share that with you. We're working hard with WisDOT, IDOT, and Amtrak to get that going. And then in terms of the appropriation this year, that $5 million, a little over $5 million that we got, we needed that because that provides the operating funds for the biennium, so we can operate the train. It wasn't something we were planning for before, so we appreciate the support of the legislature getting that to us sooner rather than later. And then the other thing is part of those funds are for to really account for inflation. As everybody experienced, inflation went up a lot higher than we had forecasted. Steel prices went up about 25% last year, so we need some additional funding just to account for sheer inflation of construction materials. So once we have a start date, we'll be doing a big press release with Amtrak and share all the details with you. Next slide. So the project probably got the most attention at the legislature this year was NLX, and that's a Minneapolis Duluth service for our trucks daily with about 2.5 hour travel time, and that's really important for us because we want that to be competitive with driving. I mean, if you have a slow train, that's going to curb your ridership. So to do that, some segments are going to operate up to 90 miles per hour. Currently, I think the freight trains are operating at about 45 on this corridor. 50. Is it 50? Okay, thanks. So that means we need to upgrade the tracks to allow for those higher speeds. We need to install new sidings, extend some existing ones to run so the trains can pass. As I told everybody, it's kind of like your junior high math problem where train A leaves City A at 20 miles an hour. So working through that. And then we also need to upgrade signals as well, because when trains are going faster, signals need to be in different places. We likely need to install positive train control on this line as well. And then we also need to do grade crossing improvements, and that's gonna be really important for pedestrians and motorists. So when you're operating trains at higher speeds, we just need increased protection on those grade crossings to make sure motorists don't make bad decisions. And then we also need to expand existing stations and build some new ones. It's gonna start at Target Field Station. We need to do a few improvements there. It'll terminate at the historic Duluth Union Station, where Kin's Road Museum and North Shore Scenic operate out of. And then we'll build intermediate stations in Coon Rapids, Cambridge, Hinckley, and Superior. The direction from the legislature was to make the one in Coon Rapids what we're calling an interline station. So the original plans were for, that's right at the junction between the Hinckley sub, which goes up to Duluth, and the Staple sub, which heads out to Fargo-Moorhead. So the original plans were really just have a platform on the Hinckley sub, but we got the request to actually make that interline station, so we'll actually be having two platforms, one that serves the Staple sub, one that serves the Hinckley sub, with a connection between them, so that this will be you'll be able to connect with the Empire Builder or potentially North Star as well. So it just helps increase that connectivity. And because TCMC is going to be starting out St. Paul Union Depot, that will also give us a way, until we work out the details of connecting Minneapolis and St. Paul, it gives us that connection between the two cities, and also gives us the option for long distance service. You don't have to drive all the way to St. Paul to serve the whole western metro area with reducing travel times. And then that 194.7 that we got really provides that 20% match that we need to get to apply for the federal funding. So seeing where the funding was going at the legislature this year, we tried to be opportunistic, and there was some open funding opportunities with FRA, so we applied to both Corridor ID and that federal state partnership program in March. So we were going to get the state match to have that place. We could qualify for that. So as Frank said, we're expecting award announcements any day on those programs. And then the other thing I do want to touch on is a portion of that 194.7 also allows us to apply for a different federal grant to purchase locomotives and cars for both NLX and Minnesota's share of the equipment for that Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago service. It's going to start with Amtrak legacy equipment, so we wouldn't be buying all the equipment for that service. WSDOT and IDOT would have to be buying some, but this would allow us to buy our share. And that's really important because being able to do a bigger order of this equipment is kind of custom made, so it's not like going to your car dealership. And so this really helps reduce your cost quite a bit on your per unit price. Next slide. So the other thing, and I feel like we're getting pretty close to aligning with what Brian's priorities are. The legislature did appropriate $4 million to start looking at the Twin Cities, St. Cloud, Fargo, Moorhead corridor. We've been asked to do 2 studies. The first one is really looking at determining the steps and costs to develop, implement, and operate an extension of North Star Arterial Rail from Big Lake up to St. Cloud. So that study is underway. It's currently on schedule, on budget, and that is due to the legislature in mid-February. And then whatever the remaining funds we're going to be required to use to look at a bigger study, and that's going to be looking at the full corridor and looking at, it's really going to be an analysis and evaluation of transit and rail needs on this corridor. So it's going to not just be intercity, but looking at all the travel needs on this corridor. Staple sub is the busiest line in the freight line in the state, so every slot matters. So we need to determine what the need is and how to best meet that. Especially as you're looking between Twin Cities and St. Cloud, is that what is your need for commuter versus intercity, and what are potential needs for buses. So we'll kick that off next year, and that's due in February of 2025. And then, as Representative Koegel talked about, we greatly appreciate getting our base budget increased. It was, I think, $500,000 for over a decade, and so that did get bumped up to $988,000, and that's really for passenger planning and project management. So we're using that to start staffing up. We just got an engineer on board here in September. We got another posting for a program director or manager, and then we're also working on consultant contracts to get consultant assistants on board because, we can't do this all on our own, nor should we. And then the other really key thing that probably flew under the radar this year is that some of the legislation was changed to allow, starting in 2027, a portion of state property taxes that railroads pay to be invested in passenger rail. And so that is really key because that creates that sustainable funding source for passenger rail, and that's gonna be really important as we get into operations. A lot of states are really dependent on their annual or biennial appropriations, so this is gonna give us that stability moving forward and be able to use whatever else is left over to start planning do planning work in other quarters. Okay. So, and then I just want to kind of let everybody know what else is, what the look ahead is. There are no number of other quarter ID applications that have been submitted. We applied for NLX only. We worked with FRA, and what we heard was that they really wanted applications from one applicant. They didn't want competing applications for the same route. So we really worked with partners across the region to figure out who should really be submitting the application and who should be writing letters of support. So we decided that MnDOT would be submitted an application for our second daily TCMC train, and that being the same existing route through La Crosse, but also figuring out how to get that service extended to Minneapolis so we can bridge that gap between St. Paul and Minneapolis and connect to NLX. MnDOT also applied for a new TCMC route that would go through Madison and Eau Claire. As you get further north, the historians in here will notice would follow a lot of the old Chicago Northwestern 400 route, which is now UP. And then our friends out in at the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority out in Montana applied for restoring North Carolina long distance train, which kind of ties in with Frank's study. And then our friends over in Eau Claire at the Chippewa St. Croix Passenger Rail Commission applied for a more frequent Eau Claire Twin City service, and that's also in our rail plan. So that would kind of augment that MnDOT application. And that one's really interesting because they submitted as using a private operator for that service. So we're looking forward to seeing how that goes. And then we look forward to hearing what Frank may include in his study come early 2024. That may inform some of our longer range planning, and probably will be incorporating that into the rail plan moving forward. So I think that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks a lot.
Gary, you mentioned you'd like to say a couple words?
Sure. Nona? So on the table back there are some treats from Wisconsin. There are muchus, cow pies, otterfingers, cranberries, and cherries. But Nona is our president, and I'd like to have her present an award. Our state is incredibly grateful for the work and the leadership that Minnesota has done in the last several months. It's been very helpful to us. Our governors are friends. They work together. To our legislators, thank you in Minnesota for all your work, and we appreciate it very much. Now let Nona present to our guys the award.
On behalf of All Aboard Wisconsin to All Aboard Minnesota, congratulations on 10 years.
Thank you.
Thank you for the leadership you've shown us.
Nona is president of All Aboard Wisconsin, an organization, as I mentioned during our presentation, that we partnered with on many different joint meetings.
From day one.
From day one, that's right. We also have some other distinguished guests here. Mark Magliari, who is from the Government Affairs Office at Amtrak, and their senior deputy spokesman has joined us. Thank you, Mark, for coming.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. And now,
James sends his regards. He was unable to attend. I heard there was cake, so I said I'll do it.
And cow pies.
You can have 2 pieces.
and now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our
honored guest, Representative Alice Hausman, who was in the Minnesota House for over 30 years and an absolute steadfast champion for passenger rail for more than 3 decades.
Oh.
So we want to thank you for everything that you've done. And with that, Representative Hausman gets to cut the first piece of our celebration cake.
And do you get it? Do you get the first piece?
No, it's for you.
Well, happy anniversary, all aboard Minnesota.
Well, thank you. So thank you all for coming. That concludes our program. For anybody that would like cake, we'll cut it, and please step up and get a piece.
Well, no, we'll deliver it.
Oh, great.
We'll deliver it.
Okay.
You don't have to even get up. If you want to sneak back, we have lots of hoagie sandwiches left too. Oh yes, and behind me I have tons of free stuff. Please take it, I don't want to take it home. You guys so.
Oh, I'm not going to take first.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Go slowly, just like your hands on the president.
But those two guys started.
And then they got me. It's great. So we're all
Yeah, I read that online.
What we're gonna do.